One day the Philistine armies began gathering together for war, and they set up their camp in Judah. King Saul and the Israelite armies set up their camp in the valley of Elah. The valley was between the Philistines and the Israelites, and they could both see each other on the other side. The Philistines had a special secret weapon, a giant soldier named Goliath. Goliath was 10 feet tall. His helmet was very large, and his body armor weighed about 125 pounds. He wore special armor plates on his legs and carried a giant spear across his back. He also had a giant shield that was so large, another soldier had to walk in front of him just to carry it. One morning, Goliath barged his way out of the front of the Philistine army and began to yell at the Israelites. "Why did you even bother to come line up for battle?" he said. "Don't you see that I am a Philistine and you are nobody? Choose your best soldier and send him to fight me. If he's able to kill me, the Philistines will serve you. But if I kill him first, you will become our slaves." After hearing the terrible things the giant said, King Saul and the Israelites were very afraid. For 40 long days, every morning and every evening, Goliath continued to step out front and insult the Israelites. Now there was a young man from Bethlehem named David, who had 7 brothers. Their dad's name was Jesse. David's 3 oldest brothers had joined the army to help King Saul. David was the youngest son, and his job was taking care of his father's sheep. One day Jesse said to him, "David, go to the camp and check on your brothers, and then come back and tell me how they're doing. Take them this roasted grain and bread, and take this cheese to their commanding officer. You'll find them at the valley with King Saul's armies. They should be preparing for battle right about now." Early the next morning, David packed his belongings, left his sheep in the care of someone else, and set out for the camp just like his daddy had said. He reached the camp just as the armies were getting into their positions. David ran to greet his brothers. As they were talking, Goliath stepped out front once again and proceeded to shout all sorts of insults at the Israelites. But this time, David heard him. Just like before, when the Israelites saw the giant, they all ran away in fear. They wondered just who could save them. David asked, "What will be done for the man who kills this giant? Who does he think he is, embarrassing God's army like this?" Then they told him about the promises King Saul had made. They said, "Whoever kills Goliath will receive a huge reward, and he'll get to marry the king's daughter. And not only that, his family will never have to pay taxes again." When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him talking about this with the people, he got very angry at David and said, "Why did you even come down here? And why did you leave those few sheep with somebody that you were supposed to be watching? I know you're just being sneaky. You just came to watch the battle." "What did I do?" David said. Then he continued to ask people about the reward for killing Goliath. Someone overheard his questions and told King Saul about him, and King Saul sent for David. When he arrived before the king, David said, "King, there's no need for anyone to be afraid of this giant. I'll go fight him." But King Saul said, You can't fight Goliath. You're only a teenager. He's been fighting battles since he was your age." But David said, "My job at home was keeping my father's sheep. And whenever a lion or bear came and stole a sheep from my flock, I went after it and I rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned to attack me, I grabbed it by the hair, I hit it, and I killed it. I've killed both a lion and a bear, and I know this giant is going to be just like them. He's embarrassed God's armies long enough, and the same God who protected me from that lion and that bear will protect me from this giant." King Saul hesitated, but then said to David, "All right, you may go and fight him, but may the Lord be with you." Immediately, King Saul began to put his own suit of armor on little David's shoulders. He put his helmet on David's head and even gave David his sword. David fastened on the king's sword over the armor and tried walking around with them on. He felt awkward and uncomfortable. So he said to the king, "King, thanks, but no thanks. I'm sorry, I can't wear these. They don't fit, and I'm not used to them." Then he took off the king's armor, picked up his own staff, and walked over to a nearby stream. From the stream, he chose 5 stones and put them in his pouch, and then with his sling in his hand, he set out to encounter the giant. Meanwhile, Goliath also began to approach David. As he got closer, he was surprised to realize that David wasn't even a grown man. He was just a handsome young teenager. This embarrassed Goliath and made him very angry. And he said to David, "Am I a dog that you would try to chase me with sticks?" Goliath began to curse David and to say many mean things. "Come here," he said. "I'll feed you to the birds and the wild animals." But David answered, "You may have a sword and a spear, but I'm coming at you in the name of the Lord God of Israel, whom you have dishonored. Today he will hand you over to me. I'll take you down and cut off your head. We'll feed you and your army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." Goliath burned with rage after hearing those words. Then suddenly, in a wild fury, he raced in for the attack. The ground shook with every giant step he took, but David still wasn't afraid. The brave teenager ran out quickly to meet the angry giant. Reaching into his pouch and taking out a stone, he placed it in his sling. Goliath continued to race toward David. He was determined to crush that little shepherd boy under his giant feet. David could see the hatred in his giant eyes, but he was very brave because he knew that God was with him to help him. As Goliath got closer and closer, David prepared to launch his weapon. He lifted his arm and began to spin his sling, and then suddenly, with a mighty shout, he released the stone. It flew through the air at an amazing speed, and with perfect precision, it found its angry target and struck him right in his forehead. The stone sank deep into Goliath's skull, killing him instantly, and with a loud crash that sounded like an earthquake, he fell face down dead to the ground. Without hesitation, David ran and stood over his enemy's body. He took Goliath's own sword from its holder, and just like he had promised, he cut off his head. Yes, God helped David defeat his enemy with only a sling and a stone. Even without a sword, he struck down that Philistine champion and killed him. When the Philistine army realized that their number 1 soldier was dead, they turned around and began to run away in fear. The Israelite armies raced after them, shouting and cheering, and they chased them all the way back to their hometowns, killing many of their soldiers along the way. After everything was over, while David was still holding Goliath's head, King Saul asked David, "Whose son are you?" "My father is Jesse. We are from Bethlehem," David answered. Later, when the Israelite armies returned from chasing the Philistines, they gathered up all the stuff that had been left at the Philistine camp, and they took it home for themselves. David also took Goliath's head to Jerusalem, but he took the giant's weapons to his own tent, and he kept them safely there.